Okay, I know we talked about the drop site massacre in the Horus Heresy video. However, this single event is what kicked off a lot of the plot points in modern Warhammer, from the Alpha Legion showing they can get their infiltrators pretty much anywhere they want, to the attitudes of the modern Iron Hands, Raven Guard, and Salamanders chapters. And the survivors from this story were the reason why Khal was able to make the Primaris Marines. So yeah, it kinda deserves its own video. The Dropsite Massacre was a story brought up in the book Horus Heresy Fulgrim, as the Horus Heresy originally never had a Dropsite Massacre. Since then, though, the Dropsite Massacre has been a sea of contradicting information, debating who actually participated in the ground battle, to how many legionaries were on the ground, though now thanks to Horus Heresy 3rd edition, the official numbers have been cemented. So there's that at least. Now, we won't be covering the whole Isstvan campaign, just the events leading up to the Dropsite Massacre and the massacre itself. This is due to the fact that most of the battles within the Isstvan system were just to lure the Loyalists in and crush them utterly at Isstvan V. So let's get into the actual story of the Dropsite Massacre and see how this one battle would go on to influence the rest of the Horus Heresy and the Imperium as a whole. So, to understand the Dropsite Massacre, we have to go back to when Horus was planning his rebellion. When making his rebellion, Horus knew he had 8 legions, including his own, to back him up, but that left 10 others running around, legions whose loyalties were unknown that he wanted to take advantage of later, or were loyal to a fault and he knew even getting their private search history wouldn't get them to join. So the plan was pretty ingenious. Horus would use his power as War Master to deploy the legions he knew were the most loyal and dangerous far away, deploying the Dark Angels, Blood Angels, and Ultramarines far into the galactic east, deploying the Space Wolves to wipe out the Thousand Sons, who knew Horus was a traitor, and isolating the White Scars by throwing them into a campaign against an Orc Empire until Horus could determine their loyalty. That left the Imperial Fists, Iron Hands, Salamanders, and Raven Guard. Horus knew that he couldn't move the Imperial Fists, as their orders from the Emperor were to protect Terra and the Sol system. Which was fine, because Dorn is as predictable as a culture war grifter, and Horus could plan around that. The Salamanders and Raven Guard were the easiest legions to plan around, because neither could win a straight-up fight against 8 legions. The problem became the Iron Hands. Horus originally was planning to send the Iron Hands somewhere far off, but then Horus's brother Fulgrim stepped in. Fulgrim had long since been corrupted by a demonic sword that made his ego go even further into toxic overdrive. However, Fulgrim and the Iron Hands Primarch, Ferrus Manus, were as close as SpongeBob and Patrick, so Fulgrim made the argument to Horus that he could corrupt Ferrus Manus to the traitor's side. Horus weighed his options, and he would either get a strong and disciplined legion like the Iron Hands on his side, or have to wipe them out like the Salamanders and Raven Guard. So, Horus agreed to Fulgrim's plan, and adjusted his plans to include the Iron Hands, though this meant that when the Emperor's children purged their loyalists on Isstvan III, Fulgrim wasn't present, as he was off trying to convince Ferrus Manus to join up. And that plan fell through immediately, because Fulgrim heavily misread his friendship with Ferrus, leading to a fight between the two former friends, where Fulgrim was able to knock Ferrus out and kill Ferrus's honor guard. And then as he fled, he had his small fleet, which was deployed in the center of the Iron Hands fleet, fire upon them from the inside, then flee to Isstvan to report on the bad news. Now, by the time Fulgrim did this, Horus's rebellion was already revealed, with Rogel Dorn building up a retribution force to go arrest Horus, and the traitor Primarchs Mortarion, Angron, and Fulgrim. Dorn gathered the Raven Guard, Salamanders, Alpha Legion, Iron Warriors, Night Lords, and Word Bearers to go after the traitor legions, with Ferrus Manus already in pursuit of Fulgrim, with only his favorite company to keep up with him, since he was outpacing his own legion, who were still recovering from the surprise attack. The Dark Angels would also learn about the betrayal, and actually took steps to stop a supply of weapons and vehicles that were going to be sent to Horus. However, the Iron Warriors arrived, and Perturabo convinced Lionel Johnson to hand the weapons over with the promise that Perturabo would back Lionel if the role of War Master was to be given to someone else. Yes, Lionel gave Perturabo a weapons cache, because Perturabo promised to back Lionel for a role both idiots wanted. Horus was pissed that Fulgrim failed to convince the Iron Hands to join, and even more pissed that Fulgrim knocked Ferris out instead of just killing him when Fulgrim had the chance. But aside from that wrinkle in the plan, the stage was set. Small garrisons of traitor legionnaires were set up around the Isstvan system to report on the size of the Loyalist forces coming in, and fortifying Isstvan V to make it look like that was where the traitors would make their final stand. The first of the Loyalists to arrive was, of course, the Salamanders and Raven Guard, who quickly wiped out the traitor garrisons leading up to Isstvan, and began to scout and probe the Isstvan V defenses, though the Raven Guard took note that the traitor armada wasn't anywhere to be found, which was concerning, but it did allow the Salamanders and Raven Guard fleets to take up positions over Isstvan V, and now it was revealed that Ferrus Manus, who would arrive shortly after, was promoted to commander of the whole invasion, and the Imperial Fist fleet being sent to reinforce the Seven Legions would be late, as they got delayed by warp storms. When Ferrus Manus arrived, he wanted to launch an immediate attack on the traitor forces, though Corax and Vulcan were hesitant, since they had taken the time to monitor traitor defenses, and it was a pretty formidable line. Ferrus pulled rank, however, and told him that the other 4 Loyalist legions were mere hours from translating into system, so it was best to attack now, take out the initial anti-air defenses, and make a landing zone so that when the other legions arrived, it would be smooth sailing. Barely being convinced, the Raven Guard, Iron Hands 1st Company, and Salamanders launched an orbital bombardment to throw off the enemy anti-air defenses, then immediately launched a massive drop pod assault to get as many legionaries onto the ground as possible. The major battle took place in what was called the Urgal Depression, with the Iron Hand, Salamanders, and Raven Guard engaging the mixed line of Emperor's Children, World Eaters, Death Guard, and Sons of Horus, with the traitors being supported by the traitor Imperial Army and Titan Legion elements. When Primarchs Ferrus Manus and Vulcan crashed into the enemy lines alongside with their bodyguard retinues, the traitors' line buckled under the weight, and even worse for the traitors, the Loyalist armored units, Imperial Army and Titan Legions, were beginning to land and put pressure on the traitor lines. With the combined weight of the Loyalist forces, the traitor line eventually caved in. With the traitors' well-prepared positions collapsing, they opted to retreat, and at this time, the 4 other legions had arrived, taking advantage of the landing zone the Iron Hand, Salamanders, and Raven Guard had fought for, with the Iron Warriors taking the time to fortify the positions with pre-made fortresses and walls, along with setting up proper landing points for the other 3 legions to land safely. Now, this is where things began to go wrong. The Loyalists taking the Urgal Depression was a hard fight, and the 3 Loyalist legions had been badly mauled. The Iron Hands lost their 1st company captain, while the Raven Guard and Salamanders took a rough beating, as they got stuck fighting the Primarchs Angron and Mortarion, along with the best of their respective legions. Corax and Vulcan made the argument to retreat back to the drop zone, regroup, and resupply, then chase after the traitors with all 7 legions. However, Ferrus located Fulgrim's command center and remembered the ass-beating he got, wasn't having it, and told the 2 other Primarchs to go fuck themselves. He was off to kill a traitorous twink. With the Iron Hands running off, the Raven Guard and Salamanders made their way back to the drop zone, hailing the legions at the drop zone for assistance, as they were dragging along their wounded. However, the 2 legions only received silence in response, while the Iron Hands quickly found themselves surrounded and lost track of Ferrus, as the Primarch had outpaced his forces once again to find Fulgrim, and he found his target in a ruined fortress with a great view over the battlefield. This is when Horus would reveal the secret. In the far distance, where Horus had made his command center, he went to the tallest spire and fired off a single red flare that everyone could see. And the second that flare was seen, the battle was over. The 4 legions at the drop zone revealed themselves to be on Horus' side, firing upon the Loyalist forces, with the rest of the original traitor forces revealing that the initial forces that the Loyalists had attacked was just half of what they had, and they launched a second ferocious assault on the Raven Guard and Salamanders. The Iron Hand's first company were all wiped out, with Ferrus Manus being defeated in a duel against Fulgrim and beheaded. Ferrus Manus was the first Primarch to fall in the Horus Heresy, and presumably the first Primarch to die out of all of them. The Loyalist forces learned real quick that this was all planned, and even though Corax nearly killed the traitor Primarch Lorgar, Conrad Curse, Primarch of the Night Lords, saved his religious brother and chased Corax off, causing the Raven Guard to reform into a breakout formation and escape the drop zone, though with barely 4% of the 83,000 surviving. The chances of escape were quashed, however, as the Iron Warriors turned and fired upon Loyalist dropships and pods, and along with the Loyalist ships in orbit being destroyed by the traitor fleets. Very few managed to escape, along with the Iron Warriors, who were firing nuclear missiles at Vulcan and the Salamander's position, wiping out the majority of the Salamander's remaining forces. The only Salamanders that survived were those that managed to break out with the Raven Guard, or play dead with the Iron Hand survivors. The remaining Imperial Army and Titan legions that were loyal were either wiped out, or saw the way the wind was blowing, and begged to switch sides, with surviving legionnaires of the Loyalists also meeting similar fates, either being executed by roving patrols of traitor forces, scrounging for salvageable armor and gene seed, or bending the knee to the traitors and joining their ranks. Even worse, Vulcan, Primarch of the Salamanders, was taken prisoner by the Night Lords. The Dropsite Massacre was a devastating loss for the Imperium. Not only was Ferrus Manus killed and Vulcan captured, but the Loyalist forces also lost 2 whole legions. And even worse, due to how Ferrus Manus organized his legion and the cultural rivalries and Darwinism he fostered within it, with his death, the Iron Hands might as well have been wiped out like the Raven Guard and Salamanders, as none of the companies in the Legion could get along and went their own ways, either becoming guerrilla forces and harassing the traitor forces, becoming Black Shields and waiting for the heresy to blow over, or joining the traitors due to mixed loyalties to Horus from serving alongside him for years. Now, the Raven Guard would escape 3 months later due to a ship from their homeworld braving the blockade and saving their survivors, along with some Salamanders and Iron Hands, with other smaller groups also surviving and managing to escape, as other smaller craft were able to survive the betrayal in orbit and the Iron Warriors' anti-air fire. Small, Shattered Legion formations of Iron Hands, Raven Guard, and Salamanders that survived here would fight on for the rest of the heresy. The most famous of these groups was the members of the Sisypheum, a strike group of Iron Hands, Salamanders, and a single Raven Guard who would follow and harass the traitors for over 14 years. The consequences of the Dropsite Massacre are felt even in modern 40k. The surviving Iron Hands loyalists blame the Raven Guard and Salamanders for the loss, and blame Ferrus Manus as well for giving into his blind rage, leading to the Iron Hands and their subchapters refusing to fight alongside the Raven Guard or Salamanders, even using them as meat shields in some deployments where they were forced to fight together. The Raven Guard would slowly recover as they got off a bit better, but due to the Alpha Legion sabotage campaigns, they weren't much help and were stuck rebuilding for the rest of the heresy. The Legion that got the worst of it was the Salamanders. It had a 93% casualty rate, and lost the majority of its veterans and officer corps. By the end of the heresy, the Salamanders could barely field 900 Marines, along with losing so much gene seed to traitor forces that for the next 10,000 years, the Salamanders would be the only chapter of Space Marines with a sole exception of not having to hand their gene seed over to the tithes laid out in the Codex Astartes by Roboute Gulliman. It wouldn't be until the Primaris Marines and the end of the 13th Black Crusade of Abaddon the Despoiler where the Iron Hands began to look inward. The Raven Guard fully recovered, and the Salamanders were given a new lease on life and able to have confirmed successor chapters thanks to the Primaris Marines. But this all wouldn't happen until 11,000 years after the Drop Site Massacre. The Drop Site Massacre was meant to be Horus's coup de grace moment against the Imperium, but it only caused more issues by showing the cracks within his own forces, and the survivors turned it into an annoying thorn in the traitor's side for the rest of the heresy. And we know how the heresy ends. With the release of Horus Heresy 3rd Edition, the Drop Site Massacre eased the focus of the release box, expanding on the hours-long battle and all the different locations within it, giving a spotlight to the reintroduced Saturnine units and expanding on a battle that was only covered briefly in several Marine codices, though its consequences, both positive and negative, can be felt throughout most Imperial books. When we come back, we will be talking about my favorite story in all of Warhammer, the Bad Dab War, the original story explaining why Space Marine armies might be fighting each other. If you want to see it early, subscribe to the Patreon. It's only $5 Canadian a month, and you get to see my exclusive series. Get me to 15k subs on YouTube, and I'll do a review and full breakdown on Warhammer 40k's Fire Warrior, and stream it live on Twitch, which you should also follow. Links in the description below. Until then, I'll see you all next time.